From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. We begin in Syria, where the United States and its allies appear set to carry out imminent military action against the country's government. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened Syria and its main ally, Russia, with the possibility of U.S. missile strikes. This is in response to an alleged chemical attack in the town of Douma on Saturday.
Democrats, all, or just about all.
In a series of early morning tweets, Trump responded to Russia's promise to shoot down any missiles fired at Syria and possibly target their launch sites. Get ready, Russia, he wrote. They will be coming nice, new, and smart. Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov rebuked Trump's actions in an interview with Russia's Channel 1 in Moscow on Wednesday, stating, quote, "We do not participate in Twitter diplomacy."
We do not participate in Twitter diplomacy. We support serious approaches. We believe that it is important not to take steps that could harm an already fragile situation. We firmly believe that the pretext of using chemical weapons in Douma is invented and cannot serve as a pretext for acts of force. I repeat once again, we would not like to take part in Twitter diplomacy.
Meanwhile, Russian Deputy Commandant of Main Operation Viktor Poznyhir has stressed that an extensive investigation by Russian weapons specialists has been unable to find any physical evidence of chemical weapons use at the site of the alleged attack in Syria's Douma.
I want to emphasize that on April 9th, a day after the alleged chemical attack in Douma, Russian military specialists in the field of radiation, chemical, and biological defense, as well as military doctors, arrived directly to the site of the alleged incident. Specialists collected soil samples as well as the shell fragments from the alleged chemical weapons site. They were examined and the results showed the absence of nerve and chlorine-containing toxic substances. In territory inspection as well as visits to a medical facility that were shown in the white helmet's pictures, along with a survey of medical staff and patients, neither the use of toxic substances nor the victims among the residents of this city were revealed. Doctors of the hospital, representatives of the local population, as well as the militants themselves leaving Douma, are not even aware of the existence of any victims of chemical weapons.
Now let's move on to Brazil, where the Federal Police Union has filed a request to have the jailed former president, Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva, moved to a military detention center. The request to move Lula from the federal police headquarters in Curitiba comes just after Brazil's Supreme Court postponed for 5 days a decision on a habeas corpus request that could have set Lula free. The decision was made after the National Ecological Party asked for more time for the lawyers in the case to study the process. The court could declare Lula's detention unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the judge in charge of Lula's case has vetoed any visits to the former Brazilian president. Earlier in the day, 9 governors and representatives of different political parties were denied entry to the complex in Curitiba, where Lula has been detained since Sunday. The judge ruled that the former Brazilian president should not have any special privileges in prison. And demonstrations in solidarity with Lula are being held across Brazil and in other parts of the world. This was the scene in Sao Paulo a short while ago at the protest called Free Lula, Marielle Lives, a reference to the left-wing councilwoman Marielle Franco, who was murdered in Rio de Janeiro last month. And our correspondent, Andre Vieira, is in Curitiba with the latest.
The latest news is that the federal police officers here in Brazil have asked the courts to order the transfer of former President Lula da Silva from the police headquarters here in Curitiba to a military detention center. They argue that this mobilization, the camp set up here, is an invasion which is harming local residents and even threatening the federal police officers themselves. The social movements gathered here have said this is another step in the coup and an attempt to break up the mobilization, which they say has been entirely peaceful since last Sunday. They have also complained that the police have been harassing them every night as they rest, moving through the camp on motorbikes with their headlights on, filming people and taking photographs. They say that if Lula is moved, they will move with him and stay there until he is freed. Lula's lawyers are at the same time pursuing further habeas corpus requests to have the former president released, saying that he is a political prisoner. Today is also a day of protests across Brazil in solidarity with Lula. Early in the day, the landless workers' movement blocked highways in different parts of the country. A rally will be beginning here shortly in the camp as part of this day of protest.
We thank Andrew Vieira for that report. Former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff is in Spain, where she's making a number of appearances, including at Spain's Law College in Barcelona. Rousseff has said that the political persecution of Lula through the judiciary and the media has largely been guided by corporate interests. She said the corrupt partnerships of the country's right wing have utilized all possible means to prevent his return to the presidency, which for the first time provided Brazilians with access to land, a quality education for all, and worked towards a dignified welfare and retirement system.
Porque Lula is una referência histórica.
Lula is a historic point of reference, a historical reference in which it is possible for Brazil to grow and have a developed nation. A developed nation is one in which the people have the opportunity to study, to have wealth distributed. Lula is this possibility. This is what we try to create in Brazil. And I believe that this, I repeat this, is why he's being imprisoned.
Anti-government unrest continues elsewhere in Brazil. Students and university staff of Brasilia University were met with violent repressions at the hand of the state security services when they protested outside the Ministry of Education on Tuesday against budget cuts to public education.
On Tuesday, Brasilia University closed its doors as hundreds of students and professors held a walkout and marched on the Ministry of Education. Disgruntled students and university staff were protesting budget cuts in education. This latest protest comes as a direct response to a constitutional amendment implemented by Michel Temer's government that freezes the education budget for 20 years.
With the approval of Amendment 95, it's impossible that the education budget will increase. These policies of the federal government are now forcing universities to close.
Right now, Brasilia University, which is a public institution, has a budget deficit of almost $28 million. Without sufficient funding, around 1,000 workers may be laid off, and the institutions important to scientific investigations will be canceled.
We're suffering under the effects of cuts in scholarships for new students, outsourced worker layoffs, and even the price of food in the university canteen is becoming unaffordable.
A lot of people hold on to the hope that the situation in education will improve if former President Lula da Silva is re-elected in October. This is why they are calling for the immediate release of Lula, who is incarcerated without evidence.
In the Lula's administration, we had funds for universities. Jobs were created. Today, with the budget cuts, there are layoffs. We are fighting for Brazil's education.
In the time of the Workers' Party, governments of Lula and Dilma, Brasilia University and all Brazilian universities, even the private ones, had funds because they wanted to guarantee higher education. With this government, the funds have diminished because of the Constitution Amendment that reduces resources for health and education for the next 20 years.
Ultimately, the demonstration ended in the worst way. Police violently repressed students that were demanding the right for better public education.
And still in Brazil, at least 23 people have died after trying to escape from prison in Belém in the north of the country on Tuesday. Among the victims is a prison guard, 5 inmates, and 15 others who were allegedly involved in a prison break. The Brazilian military police were able to stop the riots and seize firearms. The prison, Santa Isabel, has 659 inmates despite having capacity for just 432. Time now for a short break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. FARC political leader Rodrigo Londoño has announced that he met with President Juan Manuel Santos to discuss Jesus Santrich's situation, who was arrested in Colombia at the request of the U.S. DEA. He tweeted, "Today we met with President Juan Manuel Santos, where he agreed on the absolute respect of Jesus Santrich's human rights. The president and his government have compromised to offer due guarantees on Santrich's process and to respect the procedures and mechanisms agreed to on the final accord." Londoño also said that the FARC is fully committed to peace in the country. And 8 Colombian policemen died in an explosion in the region of Urabá in the department of Antioquia. Another 2 policemen were hurt and 2 others are still unaccounted for. Authorities say the criminal group, the Gulf Clan, operates in the area, and the Minister of Defense of Colombia, Luis Carlos Villegas, denounced the violent attack.
This type of action renews our purpose, and we ask General Mendoza to convey to the families of the policemen our condemnation and our support to try to lessen their sorrow.
Ecuador's Interior Minister Cesar Neves held a joint press conference with the National Police and Ministry of Defense about a communique. The Ecuadorian government says they too are trying to verify the authenticity of the document. The government says it will report through official channels once it has concrete information, but says that it is committed to ensuring the safety of the missing journalists and their driver and returning them to their loved ones. The Colombian Minister of Defense also spoke about the recent communique, presumably by the criminal group that kidnapped 2 journalists and their driver from Ecuador. The document says that the 3 men had been killed. Villegas said that this information has not been verified. He said Colombia will continue to stand by the Ecuadorian government and follow their lines of communications with any updates on this case.
We have done the analysis on that text that is signed by a supposed front of the FARC, and we haven't found any element that would allow us to confirm its authenticity.
The tit-for-tat between Venezuela and Panama continues. Now, Panama has banned Venezuelan airlines from entering the country. Panama's government said in a statement on Tuesday that the airlines will be suspended for 90 days from April 25th. The targets are the state-owned Conviasa and Aeropostal, as well as private companies Avior, Laser, Santa Barbara, and Turpial. Venezuela suspended diplomatic ties with Panama last week. Panamanian airline Copa was forced to cancel dozens of flights out of Caracas. And the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has said that the only ones who need to recognize next month's presidential elections are the Venezuelan people and the National Electoral Council. Arreaza is in Brussels after meeting with EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini, who he said he has invited to observe Venezuela's elections.
The only ones who have to recognize the results in Venezuela are the Venezuelan people and the National Electoral Council. We are not worried about if Trump recognizes it, if Rajoy recognizes it, if the European Union does not recognize it. It's okay if they go beyond their capacity to dabble in new realms of political aggression against Venezuela. That's not what we want to see. It wouldn't be the best thing diplomatically. But if it happens, all we can do is govern our people.
The Venezuelan foreign minister also said that no Venezuelan government official will attend this week's Summit of the Americas in Lima after Venezuela was excluded from the event. President Maduro had said that he wasn't going after previously threatening to show up despite being uninvited by the former president of Peru, a move which was upheld by the new president, Martin Vizcarra.
I was asked by one of the ladies of her team, who is coming to the Summit of the Americas? Are you going as Minister of Foreign Affairs? I said, no official. The government was voided. We couldn't even register photographer, and because we were excluded. So crazy things happened, and I must say.
On April 11, 2002, a failed coup d'etat which temporarily ousted former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez rocked the country. However, in an extraordinary turn of events, the elected president was returned to power by the very people who he stood for. 16 years, those same people remember the events of that day.
Midday traffic fills Baralt Avenue, just below the Laguno overpass. Like any normal day, this street is teeming with Caraqueños, going about their day. But a chilling reminder overlooks them. This is the Massacre of the Silence, a monument remembering at least 20 people who were shot dead on this very spot 16 years ago. Protests against the elected government of Hugo Chavez gained momentum on April 11, 2002. A major opposition rally was called and directed towards the Miraflores Palace, where a large group of government supporters had gathered. In the confusion, shots rang out.
Sadly, a lot of people were shot and many died, but we will never forget it. This is why, more than ever, we defend the revolutionary process and overall, defense and support of Nicolás Maduro.
Some of the eyewitnesses of that tragic day gather here now, joining government supporters who are awaiting the campaign rally of President Nicolás Maduro, as he begins campaigning for the presidential elections in May. But at this spot, it's as much about remembering the past as it is about rallying for the future.
They confronted us with guns. We didn't have any. We were defending the Constitution. They start shooting out from the building, and this is how I received a bullet in my back. This is why I use now crutches to walk.
Through a combination of media distortion and a well-orchestrated opposition plot backed by Washington, Chavez was temporarily ousted before his support base returned him to power. The event remains as symbolic as ever. Following opposition protests last year, it's clear that the same tactics used back in 2002 against Chavez are being applied again. But as Venezuelans head to the ballot stations in May, the final say is down to the people. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
Public workers across Argentina are on strike. Our correspondent, Ricardo Esteban, brings us more details.
Public workers are on a national strike. There's also a huge demonstration leading to the Congressional Plaza to demand a salary increase from Macri's government. They are calling for a pay raise because it's estimated that the cost of living will go up 20% this year. They've had to deal with massive layoffs across public institutions. Social movements representing small and medium farming businesses were also here in the plaza to talk about their difficulties and the lack of support selling their products. They want solutions to their problems as a result of the policies of Macri's government.
On Thursday, Justice Devinder Ramprasad will rule on a case that is challenging Sections 13 and 16 of the Sexual Offences Act in Trinidad and Tobago. Section 13 speaks to the act of buggery or sodomy being an offence. Although not in force, it's the law which essentially makes homosexuality illegal. The case was brought on by the activist Jason Jones, and Thursday's ruling could have the potential to affect laws not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but throughout the Commonwealth Caribbean. But as attorney Leah Thompson explains, there's a catch, a legal loophole, which prevents laws made before the Constitution was written from being amended anywhere but the Parliament. And while the Constitution may limit the court's ability to amend this law, there are still options available for those who argue the law violates their equal rights.
There's also the second part of the mix, or the second barrier, is that even new laws can still stand despite their unconstitutionality if they are passed with a 3/5 majority in Parliament, which the Sexual Offences Act has been passed with. But there's also this condition that that is put, or the Constitution puts, on those type of laws. And it says that those laws can only stand where they are reasonably justifiable in a society that protects the rights of its citizens. So that actually touches on the second part of Jason's argument, which is, despite the fact that it may have passed with a 3/5 majority, we're asking this court to ask this question: are laws like these really justifiable? Should they stand in a society that is serious about protecting the human rights of its citizens?
We're going to take another short break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Turning now to Palestine, where Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has vowed that protests along the Gaza border with Israeli-occupied territory will continue until they achieve their goals. For more on this story, we go now to Talysia's Palestinian correspondent, Noah Harazin.
The activities along the border between Gaza and Israel continue for the third week in a row, and Palestinians are getting ready to join the Great March of Return this Friday, which is the third Friday of the 6 weeks. Hospitals here in the Gaza Strip has declared the status of emergency as they expected the number of casualties to rise. The numbers until now, the death toll here in Gaza Strip is up to 30, and the number of injuries is over 2,000.
Noah Harazin for that report. And finally, Aisha Prout has won Jamaica's first ever medal in the 3,000 meter steeplechase at the 2018 Commonwealth Games. Prime Minister Andrew Holness tweeted his congratulations to the athlete. The Kenyans were the favourites to win. They had to settle for silver and bronze. Prout was born in the United States, but she represents Jamaica internationally.
But they've won the steeple. Prout is in front. Can Prout get over the top here? Chest pole still 3-4 minutes.
To the end of this.
Big finish coming up. Prout goes up.
But for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talysiatv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talysia English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.